Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Internet Scrum Master. I have over 20 years experience in tech and finance. I've worked across server and application administration, QA, service desk, and for the past decade I've been a full-time Scrum Master. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're doing a deep dive on the Scrum Guide. By the end of this video you should understand the history of Scrum, the roles, the artifacts, the ceremonies, and Scrum theory. Hopefully have a greater confidence in Scrum when you join a team. Of a Scrum Master. So a bit of history. Scrum was created and developed in the 1990s by two men, Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber, the authors of the Scrum Guide. The first revision of the Scrum Guide wasn't created until 2010, so 15-20 years after Scrum was created, and since then it's had several revisions. This is the 2020 revision we'll be going over today. Both of these guys have written several books. I've skimmed through most of them. I have linked all of them below if you're interested in reading them. Jeff Sutherland was born in 1941. He served in the U.S. Air Force in Vietnam. Like I said, he's written and co-written several books on Scrum. Ken was born in 1945 and he's worked as a software developer, project manager, and consultant. He founded Scrum.org, and before that he founded the Agile Alliance, helping to create the Certified Scrum Master or CSM certification, which is one of the most recognized credentials in the industry. There was some drama between the Agile Alliance and Scrum.org, and that's why he left. That's probably another video, and probably most people don't even care about that, so maybe it won't be a video. Anyway, as I said, they've written several books, and I've read through many of them preparing for this video to get a better feel for who these guys are. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on the books themselves because the Scrum Guide is 13 pages, and these guys spend 200-page books, 500-page books going into these 13 pages. I would recommend Ken's books. I think Ken is straightforward and easy to understand and simplifies the concepts, the already very simple concepts. Jeff, I really enjoyed his book, but I have to say, for a person that's wanting to make things simpler to understand for the community, he does a lot of comparing Scrum to quantum mechanics, really delving into these things, and I kind of wish I hadn't paid for that book, to be perfectly honest with you, but I'll put some quotes up on the screen, and if you guys want, you can go buy it. The link is in the description, so there we go. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to review the Scrum Guide page by page, touching on the key points, concepts, and themes, along with how each role, artifact, and ceremony fit into the framework, and lastly, how my real-world experience differs from what you might find in the Scrum Guide. So from here on out, no more script, and it's just going to be this guy right here. The Scrum Guide, page 1, the cover, right? 2020 revision, written by these guys, the definitive guide to Scrum, the rules of the game. So why is this the definitive guide? Well, those two guys invented Scrum, so they invented it, they get to write the rules, yeah? And that's what we're going to talk about, because I don't agree with all of them. Purpose of the Scrum Guide. They developed the Scrum Guide in the early 90s, like I said. The first revision of the Scrum Guide was in 2010. We're humbled to see Scrum being adopted in many domains, holding essentially complex work beyond software product development, where Scrum has its roots. We use the word developers here, not to exclude, but to simplify. We're going to go into that more in the roles and, just the roles section, right? Because developer is anybody on the team who isn't a Scrum Master or a product owner. And when you're inside of a software development team, that makes a lot of sense. If you're trying to run Scrum to, build out marketing campaigns, unless you're doing technical work, probably not a developer, but that's what we're here to talk about. So we've got the table of contents here. We don't need to talk about that. Scrum definition, page 3, if you're following along on screen. Scrum is a lightweight framework that helps people and teams and organizations generate value through adaptive solutions to complex problems. Scrum requires a Scrum Master to foster an environment where, 1, a product owner orders the work for a complex problem into a product backlog. So The product owner writes user stories and prioritizes those user stories. English. The Scrum team turns a selection of the work into an increment of value during the sprint. Okay, I think that would be like the developers, because the Scrum Master and the product owner are working on, orchestration type of stuff. Developers turn the selection of work into an increment of value during the sprint. They build the software. They build the thing that you want to deliver incrementally, iteratively. Number 3, the Scrum team and its stakeholders inspect the results and adjust for the next sprint. Well, that is the whole Scrum team. So it includes the product owner and the Scrum Master actively working, not passively orchestrating, or actively orchestrating, whichever. And then repeat, okay? So it's not that hard. I wouldn't call that a definition. Structurally, in terms of how this is laid out, I wouldn't have put that into the definition. It's more of the requirements. But who likes semantics? The Scrum framework is purposefully incomplete, only defining the parts required to implement Scrum theory. Again, I would word this so much differently. Do you implement is theory something you implement? If you're implementing it, is it theory? We're getting off track already on page 3. But it's purposefully incomplete. We're going to talk about that. I have a video on complementary practices. The complementary practices are what you use to help fill in those gaps in the Scrum framework. Various processes, techniques, and methods can be employed within the framework. Like I talked about those complementary practices, Scrum wraps around existing practices or renders them unnecessary. We like to lean things out, but companies are pretty lean these days as it is, so. Scrum makes visible the relative efficacy of current management, environment, and work techniques so improvements can be made. It's about transparency. Transparency, that's what that means. Scrum is founded on empiricism and lean thinking. Empiricism asserts knowledge comes from experience and making decisions based on what is observed. Okay. Lean thinking reduces waste and focuses on the essentials. Like I said, there's always room to lean things out. Nothing is 100% efficient. Nothing can ever be 100% efficient. Companies are really cutting into bone a lot of times. So making things more efficient, let's try to not cut headcount. So if you're watching this, don't cut headcount. Scrum employs an iterative, incremental approach to optimize predictability and control risk. Scrum engages groups of people who work collectively, have all the skills and expertise to do the work, and share or acquire such skills as needed. The important things here, iterative and incremental. All right. We run our iterations, so iteratively, every iteration, we create an increment of software. Those increments build upon each other over time. Each increment should be a complete piece of functionality that could potentially be given to your customers. It may not actually be given to your customers. It may not make logical sense in terms of business needs to do that. But the point is, from a technical and logistical perspective, it could be done if you so chose. Scrum combines 4 formal events for inspection and adaptation within a containing event, the sprint or the iteration. These events work because they implement the empirical Scrum pillars of transparency, inspection, and adaptation. The emergent process and work must be visible to those performing the work as well as those receiving the work. Scrum, important decisions are based on the perceived state of its 3 formal artifacts. Artifacts that have low transparency can lead to decisions that diminish value. Transparency enables inspection. Inspection without transparency is misleading and wasteful. Yeah, okay, whatever. Scrum artifacts and progress towards the agreed goals must be inspected frequently and diligently to detect potentially undesirable variances or problems. Scrum provides a cadence in the form of its 5 events. So 4 events plus the sprint. We're going to get into those. What do we got? We've got the sprint planning meeting, we've got the daily stand-up, we've got the retrospective, and we've got the review meeting. Plus the sprint, there's 5. We'll talk about those more later. Adaptation. If any aspects of a process deviate outside acceptable limits, or if the resulting product is unacceptable, the process being applied or the materials being produced must be adjusted. The adjustment must be made as soon as possible to minimize further deviation. Man, why does it have to be worded like that? Okay, adaptation. We look at what we did and we say what went well and what didn't go well, and we change the things that didn't go well, and we keep doing the things that went well. Yeah? Okay, adaptation. There it is. Scrum values. Successful use of Scrum depends on people becoming more proficient and living 5 values. Commitment, focus, openness, respect, and courage. The Scrum team. Fundamental unit of Scrum is a small team of people, the Scrum team. It consists of one Scrum Master, one product owner, and developers. So like I said, you've got the dev team or the development team. That is the developers. That's everybody except the Scrum Master and the product owner. And the Scrum team is the development team plus the Scrum Master and product owner. Scrum teams are cross-functional, right? Cross-functional, meaning the members have all the skills necessary to create value each sprint. They're also self-managing, meaning they internally decide who does what, when, and how. Cross-functional means the team can get all the work done. Does not mean every single person on the team can do every single task that is required by the team. It would be great to get to that point. I mean, that's kind of an ideal state to work towards that you're never going to actually reach. But if your team members want to learn different skills, different domains, we would encourage that, but that's not what a cross-functional team means by itself. Also self-managing, so meaning they internally decide who does what, when, and how. So the product owner says what, right? The product owner determines what gets done, the development team determines how that gets done, and then when that gets done is a conversation between the two. Facilitated by the Scrum Master. Small teams tend to work better, communicate better. They're just different, maybe I'll put up on the screen, communication paths, a number of paths of communication increase exponentially as the number of people on a team increase. So I'll show you that graphic if I can find it somewhere. If Scrum teams become too large, they should consider reorganizing into multiple cohesive Scrum teams, each focused on the same product. So this would be like a scaled organization, and there's not a lot in the Scrum Guide itself about scaling. So there's like this line, and there may be one other line later on that hints at it, but there are no rules towards it or for it. The Scrum team is responsible for all product-related activities from stakeholder collaboration, verification, maintenance, operation, experimentation, research and development, and anything else that might be required. They're structured and empowered by the organization to manage their own work, working in sprints at a sustainable pace. Sustainable pace, that's velocity. I might have a video on velocity. You should watch it. It's riveting. The entire Scrum team is accountable for creating value, useful increments every sprint, increment the working piece of software or functionality if you're not building software. All right, the developers are the people on the Scrum team committed to creating any aspect of usable increment each sprint. I don't like the wording that they use here. I just don't. The specific skills needed by the developers are often broad and will vary with the domain of the work. The developers are always accountable for creating a plan for the sprint, instilling quality by adhering to the definition of done, adapting their plan towards the goal, and holding each other accountable. Okay, product owner is accountable for maximizing the value of the products resulting from the work of the Scrum team. Product owner is also accountable for the product backlog management, so that would make sense. Product owner, product backlog, seems like that tracks. Product owner responsible for developing and explicitly communicating the product goal. I would think after the first couple sprints, the team should know it, but if they don't, it's definitely on the product owner to inform them. Creating and clearly communicating the product backlog items. Again, this one is product owners have a whole lot of work, and this is something that does get dropped sometimes, not maliciously by any means, but it's just people are busy and they write stories and the stories make sense in their head. The developers look at the story, it doesn't make as much sense in the developer's head. So that's why we have the refinement meetings and the planning meetings, and we can reconcile those, but something to keep an eye on. Also, ordering the product backlog and ensuring that the backlog is transparent, visible, and understood, like I just alluded to. The product owner may do all that work or delegate it to somebody else, but the product owner is accountable. If you're looking at a RACI chart, it's accountable. For product owners to succeed, the entire organization must respect their decisions. So the product owner needs to have a really strong relationship with the stakeholders and or the customers to make that work. The Scrum Master is accountable for establishing Scrum as defined in the Scrum Guide, unless the Scrum Master disagrees with it. Then he can make a YouTube video and talk about how he disagrees with it. They do this by helping everyone understand Scrum theory and practice, both within the Scrum team and the organization. Okay. The Scrum Master is accountable for the Scrum team's effectiveness. They do this by enabling the Scrum team to improve its practices within the Scrum framework. Scrum Masters are true leaders. That's me. You can follow me. Follow, like, subscribe, do all those things. The Scrum Master serves the Scrum team in several ways, including coaching the team member in self-management and cross-functionality. Okay. Helping the Scrum team focus on creating high-value increments, causing the removal of impediments. I think in one previous version of the Scrum Guide that just says removing impediments, but now it says causing the removal of impediments, as in I am orchestrating the environment in which there will be no impediment. And in fact, that's what they do literally mean. Because they don't want developers coming to me as a Scrum Master and saying, hey, I can't do this, fix it for me. So, also ensuring that all Scrum events take place and are positive, productive, and kept within the time box. Well, my events are always positive and productive, but maybe they don't all take place. And according to the Scrum Guide, I would not be doing Scrum if I missed a single stand-up in a week. Suddenly I'm not doing Scrum. We'll talk about that later. The Scrum Master serves the product owner in several ways, including helping find techniques for effective product goal definition, okay? Helping the Scrum team understand the needs for clear backlog items, okay? Helping establish empirical product planning, facilitating stakeholder collaboration. Okay? And the Scrum Master serves the organization by leading, training, and coaching the organization in its Scrum adoption, planning and advising Scrum implementations, helping employees and stakeholders understand and enact an empirical approach for complex work, and removing barriers between stakeholders and Scrum teams. A lot more bullet points in the Scrum Guide for the Scrum Master than the developers or the product owner. I do, though, feel my product owner does a whole lot more work than I do. I'm not trying to say I do a lot of work, but my product owner, all of them that I've ever had, do a lot more. So don't let the number of bullet points confuse you on here. Scrum events. The sprint is a container for all events, right? That's the 5th event. Some things that you might want to know about the sprint. Once the sprint starts, you're not supposed to change the sprint, so you shouldn't be adding new stories to the sprint. You shouldn't be adding scope to existing stories in the sprint. Should. Quality doesn't decrease. The product backlog is refined as needed. The scope may be clarified and so scope may be clarified and renegotiated as more is learned. If you're expanding the scope of a user story in a sprint, or you're adding a user story to the sprint, adding the scope to the scope, then you are at a very high risk of not completing your forecasted work. If you forecasted 20 story points and suddenly you take that 5-point story that's in the sprint and you add the scope to it, and the work is now equivalent to an 8-point story, you're not going to, whether or not you change the story point is irrelevant, because the work in the sprint has now increased to a point you're not going to be able to complete something else in the sprint. We would need to have a lot of information in terms of what did we learn that needs to be done, how much extra effort is it, should this be a new user story in the backlog for a future sprint, what other work is in the sprint now that isn't a high priority, and can that be removed? If all of those conditions are true and you need to make the change, then make the change, but don't do that every sprint. The result of doing that is that you lose predictability. Your velocity metric becomes much less valuable, and if you do that sprint over sprint over sprint, then your velocity it's meaningless. So yes, this says scope may be clarified and renegotiated as more is learned, but you need to make that as a last resort. As don't do it all willy-nilly like. That's all I'm saying, okay? Sprint planning initiates the sprint by laying out the work performed before the sprint. So we got 3 topics for sprint planning. Why is the sprint valuable? What can be done during the sprint, and how will the work chosen get done? Why is a sprint valuable? The product owner proposes how the product could increase value. It should be clear. You need to take 5 minutes out of your sprint planning meeting and have the product owner explain to your team why the work they're doing is valuable. I really think you have a problem. They should know this. It should be a continual conversation, and yeah, I don't know. What can be done during the sprint? Well, that's going to be the conversation. You're going through the product backlog. Should be ordered and prioritized, and so the top 5, 6, 7 stories, however many, should be the ones that are being pulled into the sprint. You should have all those clearly defined prior to sprint planning. That's why we have backlog refinement. If you don't, that's fine too, but you'll need to go through that and you'll need to get those definitions, right? So if you don't have those defined, you'll need to write them out. You'll need to have the clear acceptance criteria. You'll need to estimate those in story points or whatever you're using, hopefully story points. Yeah, so, and then you're going to use your prior velocity metric to determine how many story points you can bring into the current sprint, and that's going to determine the order. So if it's properly ordered and you have 20 point velocity, then you're going to look at the first 20 points in the story in the backlog and bring those into the sprint, and that's going to be your sprint. How will the chosen work get done? That's the developers to decide. They pull that work into the sprint, and that's the first thing they do. They look at them, they break those down into tasks. Usually, if that's what they do, not all teams do tasks. But regardless, they're going to look at that and they're going to either break it down in their mind or in Jira or whatever, and figure out how it's going to get done. That's how they do it. Sprint planning is time boxed to a maximum of 8 hours for a month. Time box to a maximum of 8 hours for a 1 month sprint. For shorter sprints, the event is usually shorter. So let's break that down, because most teams run 2-week sprints. So that would be 4 hours of sprint planning. No, you shouldn't do that. If you're doing that, you should stop doing that, because I guarantee you your teammates don't like it. 90 minutes is like the maximum amount of time you need to keep anybody in a meeting anywhere, certainly not without a break. I keep my meetings to 60 minutes. My planning meeting is 60 minutes. I have a refinement meeting on the weeks that we don't have planning. That gives us 2 hours in the backlog every sprint. That's half of what they're suggesting here. Daily Scrum or daily stand-up. 15-minute meeting, you go through it, they tell you not to make it a status meeting. It is a status meeting. You know, if you're going through your CSM training right now and you need to answer the question, no, the stand-up is not a status meeting. But for all intents and purposes, you're getting the team together, they're talking to each other about the current state of the work that they're doing, and asking each other for help on how they could do it faster or better. So tell me how that's not a status meeting. The not a status meeting stand-up that we're running can be done in any sort of form. We can do a round table where you just go person to person and they talk. You can look at the Scrum board and you can kind of walk the board. I usually walk the board, because if I do a round table, then people are like, I don't know what I worked on. But if I'm like, who worked on that thing? Then they'll remember for some reason. The sprint review is to inspect the outcome of the sprint and determine future adaptations. The sprint review is the product focus, which we'll talk about the retrospective, and that's more of the process focus. So sprint review, that's where we get the stakeholders, potentially customers. I mean, it's usually not, it would be rare to see any end customers, at least in my experience, but definitely you want stakeholders there, product owner, the whole team. This is where we review the increment. We talk about what we set out to do, what we did. This ideally should not be a PowerPoint presentation. You should be having a live demo of the actual software that you created and showing it off. That's not always possible. Certainly if you're in like a big data type of environment, sometimes just having a screenshot of the data columns is a little bit better than trying to dig into like a database. But the idea is it's an interactive working meeting with the stakeholders, and they can offer feedback and give the team ideas on how to adjust moving forward. The retrospective. Like I said, the retrospective is also a review or a retro of the process that the team was using over the past sprint. So this is where we talk about what went well, what didn't go well. This is just the Scrum team, so it's the developers, the Scrum Master, the product owner. A Scrum Master makes it a safe space and one in which people are free to speak their minds and talk about what they really didn't like in frank terms without any sort of fear of repercussion from management. And that puts a lot of responsibility on the Scrum Master to buffer what is said in the retro to improvement items that come out of the retro that sometimes do need to be communicated to management. That being said, there are certainly times where there would be exceptions to that. If obviously if something gets verbally abusive, that would violate the safe space, right? That would violate the safe space, and the Scrum Master would need to take action on that. Scrum artifacts. Scrum artifacts represent worker value. What do we have? We have the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increment. The product backlog, we've been talking about that. That's what the product owner owns. That's what the ordered things of what we're going to do next. The sprint backlog, that's what's the current sprint. That's what we're working on now. It's what's going to be done in 2 weeks. The increment, that's the thing that's coming out of the sprint at the end of the 2 weeks. Product backlog is an emergent, ordered list of what needs to be done to improve the product. These would be the user stories that you would probably hear. Product backlog refinement, those are the meetings that I have in between planning sessions to make those planning sessions shorter. We review that. We write the details, we write the acceptance criteria if they're not already there. The developers ask the product owner clarifying questions about that work. The Scrum Master facilitates an estimation session where we talk about how many story points those are. That's what the refinement activity is. The refinement activity is not an actual meeting or ceremony within Scrum. It is a complementary practice, the meeting. The activity is in the Scrum Guide and should be an ongoing activity. But like I said, it is better to have just a meeting on the calendar for that. The product goal describes a future state of the product which can serve as a target for the Scrum team to plan against. So the product goal, products can be very large, very small. We could have product areas. Your product could be your website. Your product could be like a feature on your website, even. It's very scalable, but the product goal describes the future state, so it's where you're working towards. The sprint backlog is the work items that are being done in this current iteration. In the increment, like I said, it's the piece of work that's coming out of it. Multiple increments can be created during a sprint. The sum of the increments is presented at the sprint review. However, an increment may be delivered to stakeholders prior to the end of the sprint. The sprint review should never be considered a gate to releasing value. There's a lot to unpack in this paragraph here. Multiple increments can be created within a sprint. Well, we're defining an increment as a completed piece of functionality, and not said here, but very strongly implied, is that a user story is a complete piece of functionality that can be deployed independently of all other work items in the backlog. Therefore, multiple increments may be created within a sprint means multiple user stories can be completed in a sprint, each of which is an independent piece of functionality. The sum of the increments is presented at the sprint review. We're showing the stakeholders all the user stories, all the functionality coming out of those user stories from the sprint. However, an increment may be delivered to stakeholders prior to the end of the sprint. So essentially, this is just saying we can complete the user story and we can send it over to our stakeholders to take a look at it prior to the end of the sprint. Nothing wrong with that. Does it happen often? Not really, but it can. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, work cannot be considered part of an increment until it meets the definition of done. This implies an increment user story could be part of an increment, and it could be. The definition of done is a formal description of the state of the increment when it meets the quality measures for the product. The definition of done creates transparency by providing everyone a shared understanding of what work was completed as part of the increment. If a product backlog item does not meet the definition of done, it cannot be released or even presented at the sprint review. Developers are required to conform to the definition of done. If there are multiple Scrum teams working together on a product, they must mutually define and comply with the same definition of done. This would be the second line about scaling in Scrum. And yeah, if there are more than one team, you can have different levels. If you're in a safe organization, you might have a train level definition of done, and you might have a team level definition of done. Or not, or you might have a shared one. All right, end note. That's it from the framework. That was it. Like I said, it's pretty light. Yeah, I don't know how long I've been talking. End note, Scrum is free and offered in this guide. The Scrum framework as outlined herein is immutable. While implementing only parts of Scrum is possible, the result is not Scrum. Scrum exists only in its entirety and functions well as a container for other techniques and methodologies and practices. Now this is really what I disagree with. Saying Scrum is immutable, unless you're doing every single one of these things, it just fails common sense, in my opinion. If I have a 5-day work week and my daily Scrum or daily stand-up happens Monday through Thursday, and I tell the team, hey, it's Friday, have a good Friday, we're not going to do stand-up, all of a sudden I'm no longer doing Scrum and I am a failure as a Scrum Master. I just don't agree with it. Well, there you have it. All 13 pages of the Scrum Guide and my opinions on them. Having been in the world for so many years, in this Agile world, I can tell you that I've certainly never been a Scrum Master for a team or a contributor on a team or been in proximity of a team who does Scrum out of the box, by the book, 100% all the time, as is laid out. I've never seen it happen. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I've never seen it. I disagree with the fact that saying that it's immutable at all. Like you should just take that whole end note about Scrum being immutable out of the Scrum Guide altogether, in my opinion. And the fact that it's supposed to be a lightweight framework open to having things put in it, but not taken out of it, just doesn't land with me, doesn't track, it's not it, man, it doesn't work. I don't like it. I don't like it. That's all there is. Let me know what you think in the comments. Till next time, take care.